On April 6, 2014, there were 75,167 people packed into the New Orleans Superdome for WrestleMania 30. But at one exact moment, they all made the exact same sound: silence. For 21 straight years, it was the most unshakable reality in sports entertainment. The Undertaker does not lose at WrestleMania. It wasn't just a winning streak. It felt like a law of nature, a foundational truth that WrestleMania itself was built on. But on this one night, in front of a sold-out stadium, that law was broken. And what replaced it was a silence so deep, it became a part of wrestling history. A quiet so loud, we're still talking about it a decade later. So, how did we get here? How did one pinfall, one single three-count, manage to conquer a legend and plunge over 75,000 fans into a state of total historic disbelief? This is the story of the night the streak died. To really understand the silence, you first have to understand the noise that came before it for more than 2 decades. To get the magnitude of the fall, you have to appreciate the monument that was built, victory by victory, year after year. This was the streak. It didn't start as some grand plan. At WrestleMania 7 in 1991, The Undertaker beat Superfly Jimmy Snuka. It was just another match on the card. The next year, he took out his old mentor, Jake the Snake Roberts, then Giant Gonzalez. These were dominant wins for sure, but the idea of the streak hadn't been born yet. It was simply The Undertaker doing what he did best, taking souls on the grandest stage. For years, it just kept going. Big wins against guys like Diesel at WrestleMania 12 and Psycho Sid for the WWF Championship at WrestleMania 13 were huge for his career. But the whole undefeated thing was still just a piece of trivia for the most hardcore fans. Even his brutal personal war against his own brother Kane at WrestleMania 14 was more about their rivalry than some growing win-loss record. It wasn't until around WrestleMania X7, after he beat Triple H for his 9th win, that the idea really started to take shape. Commentators mentioned it more. Fans started to anticipate it. By the time he defeated the legendary Ric Flair at WrestleMania X8 to hit a perfect 10-0, the narrative was set. The Undertaker held up 10 fingers to the roaring crowd, and in that moment, the streak was officially born as a spectacle. From then on, the streak was its own character. It was bigger than championships. A match against The Undertaker at WrestleMania became a bigger prize than a title shot. It was a chance to become immortal. Young, hungry stars like Randy Orton, the legend killer, built his entire identity around wanting to end the streak at WrestleMania 21. But he fell to a tombstone piledriver just like the rest. The matches got bigger, the stories more emotional. His world title win against Batista at WrestleMania 23 is a classic. His main event against Edge at WrestleMania 34 was a masterpiece. But the peak, the absolute zenith of the streak's legend, came in 2 straight years against one man: Shawn Michaels. At WrestleMania 25 and 26, The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels put on what many still call the greatest wrestling matches of all time. The first was a near-flawless epic. The second, with Michaels' career on the line, ended with the Heartbreak Kid's retirement. These matches made the streak feel sacred. It wasn't a record anymore. It was the soul of WrestleMania. The story rolled on with 2 more brutal wars against Michaels' best friend, Triple H, in matches called The End of an Era. When The Undertaker beat CM Punk at WrestleMania 29, the record stood at an impossible 21-0. It felt like a fairy tale happening in real time, a certainty in an uncertain world, and that certainty was about to meet a brutal, unbelievable end. And that brings us to WrestleMania 30 in New Orleans. As the show approached, the yearly question popped up: who would dare challenge the streak? The answer this time was different. It wasn't a rising star or an old rival. It was a storm, a primal force of nature named Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar wasn't just another WWE superstar, he was a terrifyingly legitimate athlete, a former NCAA Division the One Heavyweight Wrestling Champion, the youngest WWE champion in history, a former UFC Heavyweight Champion. He was, as his advocate Paul Heyman perfectly put it, the Beast incarnate. Lesnar didn't play by the usual rules of sports entertainment. He was a prize fighter who showed up, destroyed people, and left. The build-up to the match was unique. It wasn't some complex emotional story. It was simple, direct, and scary. Paul Heyman did most of the talking, and he didn't just suggest Brock could win, he promised it. He laid out the cold, hard logic. Brock Lesnar was the one in 21-1. He was the exception to the rule, the conqueror who would do what 21 others couldn't. The Undertaker was his usual menacing self. During their contract signing, in a now famous moment, he stabbed a pen straight through Lesnar's hand, a violent promise of what was to come. But even with Lesnar looking like a genuine threat, the consensus among fans, experts, and even Vegas was nearly unanimous. The Undertaker would win. It was a foregone conclusion. The betting odds were ridiculously one-sided. This was the ultimate immovable object versus the ultimate unstoppable force. But for 21 years, every single person who stood across from The Undertaker at WrestleMania had been stopped. Why would this be any different? The fans knew how this story ended, because it had ended the same way 21 times before. The gong, the entrance, a brutal war, a dramatic tombstone piledriver, and The Undertaker's hand raised in victory. That was the tradition. And 75,167 people in the Superdome thought they were there to see that tradition live on. They had no idea they were about to witness the most shocking moment in the history of their sport. The energy inside the Superdome on April 6, 2014 was electric. The night had already delivered huge moments, but everyone knew what the real main event was. Then the lights went out. The familiar gong echoed through the arena, sending that classic chill down every fan's spine. This was his yard. The Undertaker's entrance was a spectacle. On the stage stood 21 caskets, one for each of his past victims, as he made his slow, deliberate walk to the ring. It was his ritual, his domain. Brock Lesnar, on the other hand, bounced on his feet like a caged animal. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't in awe. He was there to fight. The bell rang, and the fight started. And almost right away, something was off. Within the first 5 minutes, The Undertaker suffered a severe concussion. He'd later say that he has almost no memory of the match. His last clear thought was from that afternoon. For the man at the center of it all, the night is a total blur. For the fans watching, it was about to become unforgettable. The match that followed was ugly and brutal, nothing like the slick epics of the past few years. It was a gritty, punishing brawl. Lesnar was relentless, hitting German suplex after German suplex, throwing the legend around the ring with scary ease. The Undertaker, running on pure instinct, fought back with everything he had. He even locked in his signature submission, Hell's Gate, but Lesnar managed to escape. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The Undertaker got Lesnar up and hit a thunderous tombstone piledriver. The crowd erupted. This was it. This was the finish. He made the cover. 1, 2. Lesnar kicked out. A wave of shock hit the stadium, but it turned into excitement. Of course he kicked out. This was a war. But the punishment continued. Lesnar hoisted The Undertaker up and hit his finisher, the F5. 1, 2. The Undertaker kicked out. The crowd exploded. He survived the Beast's best shot. Now the dead man would rise and claim victim number 22. Lesnar, looking confused, hit a second F5. He went for the cover again. 1, 2. The Undertaker kicked out again. The Superdome was losing its mind. The belief was now absolute. The streak could not die. Frustrated, Brock Lesnar picked The Undertaker up one last time. He let out a primal scream and delivered a third, devastating F5 right in the center of the ring. This time, it felt different. Lesnar collapsed on top of him for the cover. The referee dropped to the mat. 1. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the kick-out they knew was coming. 2. It's a law of nature. He always kicks out. 3. The referee's hand slapped the mat for the third and final time. The bell rang. And then, nothing. Absolute deafening silence. There were no boos. There were no cheers. For several long seconds, the only sound in a stadium with over 75,000 people was the low hum of the lights. The cameras panned across the crowd, showing a sea of frozen faces, hands on heads, mouths wide open, eyes staring in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. This couldn't be real. The image of one fan in the front row, his eyes practically popping out of his head, became a meme that perfectly captured how everyone felt. At the commentary desk, there was just as much confusion. Announcer Michael Cole, who had no idea this was the plan, was just as stunned. His voice, usually full of energy, was quiet and hesitant. He just said, "The streak is over." Then a long pause. Nothing else needed to be said. His stunned silence mirrored the 75,000 people listening. Brock Lesnar's music finally hit, but it felt wrong, an unwelcome noise in a moment defined by its absence. The number 21-1 appeared on the giant screens. It looked alien. As The Undertaker slowly got to his feet, the shock in the arena finally turned into a wave of respectful applause. A standing ovation for a fallen god. But the moment that will be remembered forever wasn't the applause, it was the silence. The historic, unbelievable, total silence. But you can't deny the impact. That one victory turned Brock Lesnar from a top-tier star into the final boss. He became the Conqueror, an unstoppable monster who would dominate the WWE Championship for years. The win gave him an aura of legitimacy that no one else had. For The Undertaker, it was the beginning of the end. He would return for more WrestleManias, but the mystique had changed. The loss made him vulnerable. It made him mortal. It added a new, tragic layer to his character, the fallen warrior fighting against time itself. Years later, it's still one of the most debated topics among wrestling fans. But what isn't up for debate is the power of that moment. For 21 years, fans were conditioned to believe in something impossible. The streak was a tradition that anchored the biggest show of the year. Ending it was a deliberate move to shatter that certainty and remind everyone that anything can happen in the WWE. It was the ultimate proof that no story is sacred and no legend is forever. The silence that fell over New Orleans was the sound of a core belief being shattered for thousands of people at the exact same time. It was a moment that ended a legacy, but in doing so, created a new one that will never be forgotten. If you remember where you were when the streak was broken, share your story in the comments. What was your gut reaction to that 3 count? And if you enjoy deep dives into iconic wrestling moments like this one, make sure you like and subscribe for more. Maybe the silence wasn't just about shock, maybe it was also a moment of reverence. A collective, unspoken tribute to the end of the single greatest accomplishment in the history of sports entertainment. The streak may be over, but the legend of the man who built it, and the night it all came crashing down, will live forever.